Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Majid Jirania, Director of Compliance at Competition Bureau Canada, is my guest on this episode with the fourth and final of our series created to help us understand the laws governing and protecting retailers. In this episode, Majid talks about the culture, process, practices, and concrete measures retailers can and should have regarding compliance with the law. Majid, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, you are my fourth and final interview, and you and I have been working all along for this great series from the Competition Bureau. So welcome to the podcast yourself. You've had your colleagues on 3 times now. Now you get the mic yourself to bring us home. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in now and tie things together for the audience.
Fantastic. Now, your colleagues are in all kinds of different places around Canada. Where are you sitting today? Where do you work out of?
So I'm based in the Competition Bureau's office in Toronto. And some of my colleagues, I think, who have been on have, like you said, been from all across the country. You know,
we've talked about a lot of things. We've covered a lot of ground in 4 episodes. Now, for the listeners who might just be listening to this for the first time, we're not going to spend much time talking about the Competition Bureau or how you go about the tradecraft of enforcement and investigation. For that information, just page back to the first interview in the series, and I'll put a link in the show notes. And so you and I can spend all of our time just talking about what you do and what we want to talk about today. So I won't ask you too many questions about the Competition Bureau itself, but I will ask you a few questions about yourself. So before we jump in, tell me about yourself, how you got to do what you do today, and what's your area of practice?
Sure. So my title right now at the Bureau is Director of Compliance, but this is a position that I've been in for a few years now. I've done a few other things with the Bureau. Before that, I was in the private sector, so I'm happy to give you a bit of a background. I started off working in oil and gas for a large national player in Canada. I did sales and marketing work for them. And then I decided that I wanted to pursue sort of a childhood dream. And so I went to law school, despite a number of people telling me, I don't know if that's the best idea. I did it anyways.
Isn't that funny? Because usually you'd be encouraged to go to. Did you have family that was in law? Like, what was the kind of genesis of? Oh, I don't know if that's such a good idea. It seems like a pretty good thing to do.
Oh, it was friends and others in my network who said, I don't know, law school is not for everyone. Do it at your own risk and at your own peril.
Right. So you understood early on the meaning of caveats, I guess you could say, from that.
Yes, I think that's right. And I definitely jumped in with eyes open. That's for sure.
And how did you enjoy law school? I mean, as you said, it's not for everybody, but for some, it's just a swimming in just everything from citizenship to just knowledge. Did you approach it that way, or were you a little more workmanlike around? This is a new trade for me, or did you really jump in and appreciate the other aspects of the law school experience?
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I jumped in with both eyes open, and I treated it as a learning experience. I wasn't going in there with a firm knowledge of what I wanted to do when I got out the other end, and so I just soaked it up. And I mean, there were classes that I enjoyed, there were classes that I enjoyed less.
Sure.
But I kept an open mind, and it was actually through law school and the summer intern process that I got into competition law, quite by accident. It was by working in my summer after second year at a large law firm in Toronto that I got my first exposure to competition law. And like I said, kept an open mind, and I found that brought together my experience so far in law, learning about it, and my previous experience in business in a really interesting way. So that was the genesis, actually, of my career now to date.
So let's talk about what you do today. Compliance is kind of a big word. It's a bit of a scary word, compliance. But let's unpack what that means. Like, let's talk about compliance and what does it matter. It's kind of the theme for our episode today is taking our discussion a little bit to a more theoretical or a more philosophical or a more business ethics level. So talk about compliance and why does it matter?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So compliance and ethics, as you mentioned, they go hand in hand. And I don't think there is a universal definition of compliance, but I think it can be thought of as, the practice of understanding the laws and rules that you have to abide by, you as a person, or you as an employee or a manager in a business, and then doing the things that it takes to minimize the risk of you or your business violating the laws that apply to you. So I that's kind of how I see it. And I should mention that, in talking to you today, my views are my own. I'm speaking personally. And so what I say is not necessarily representative of a steadfast position or enforcement approach of the Competition Bureau or the Commissioner of Competition.
I like what you're talking about. I guess we would call it the written law and then the spirit of the law or the philosophy behind the rules. Is that how you think of it as well? Like we talked about ethics, but it's really about understanding not just you can try to get clever to meander through the written rules, but is what you're talking about understanding both the black letter law, so to speak, and the spirit of the of compliance?
So I think that it's important for everyone to understand both the letter of the law and, as you say, the spirit of the law. And, ultimately, the Competition Bureau as an enforcement agency definitely, I would think encourages everyone to take a broad view in that sense and to ultimately do the right thing. And I think that most, if not all, business people want to ultimately do the right thing rather than get involved with and embroiled in, investigations and lengthy court battles and such. I think no one's really out there with that in mind when they're going out there and doing business.
And let's talk about that. So, there's legitimate differences of opinion or differences of interpretation. But again, you're talking about something that's a little more about, understanding these past 3 episodes, our discussion, and taking the brand and understanding the impact on the reputation. Have you seen in your time there an enlightenment around that, or do you see people who begin in one place in the journey and wind up in a different one? Talk about that a bit.
If I think of the awareness of the public, of business people around competition law, I think there's definitely work to be done there. Competition law is an area that can be quite technical. It can be a little bit esoteric, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And so one of the reasons that I'm glad to be on the podcast is to try to demystify that. I know that my colleagues who talked about deceptive marketing, collusion, abusive dominance, they all tried to do that. And I think listening in and trying to get at least a general sense of what these rules are, what the conduct looks like, is a good way to increase awareness and to help people understand and spot issues early before they turn into major problems for the business, whether it's through relations with other businesses or, like I said, getting embroiled in a Competition Bureau investigation.
I guess what we're also talking about, as is often the case, is culture in an organization, right? So talk about your advice there for the listeners around helping to build a culture that keeps them in the right place and basically keeps them out of your office, I guess you could say.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about culture, and I think that's an incredibly important part of what a company can do, or what individuals within a company can do to stay compliant. I think, no matter what's written on paper in terms of a protocol or a procedure, if there isn't a strong culture of compliance within an organization, that written procedure or protocol is going to be very hard to put into practice. We have guidance material that I'll talk about later, but that talks about the culture of compliance that's important for all businesses. And I should mention all businesses in particular, because compliance and putting in place measures to mitigate your risks is relevant for businesses of all sizes. If you're small, it's just as important as if you're a big multinational. And I think more importantly, small or medium-sized businesses can put in place credible and effective compliance measures, regardless of their size, of the resources that they have to devote to compliance, because there's no one-size-fits-all program. So I think that's an important point, and it's a point that I'll mention a few times in our discussion. So on the culture front, I think the commitment at the highest levels is incredibly important. In the compliance field, we talk about tone from the top. Yeah. That's a starting place, I think, for businesses to build a strong culture of compliance. But then it takes the contribution, the input of everyone in the organization, up and down the ranks. And if you have a strong leadership team that models the behaviors of compliance, that values compliance, that rewards compliance leadership, then I think you're going a long way to send the right message to the rest of the staff and build ultimately a strong culture of compliance. And at the end of the day, that culture can help you do the right thing, like I mentioned before. And it can help bring you the benefits of complying. It can help you detect, for example, misconduct early if it does happen, despite having measures in place. It can signal to us as a law enforcement agency that you have a commitment to compliance if we end up looking into your compliance program. It can help you with the reputation of your business. There's a whole bunch of ways in which a strong culture of compliance can help you.
So that's interesting. Let me pull on that thread a little bit. So I guess there's some credit given, for example, that sometimes there could be a great process and culture, but a bad actor, and that you would take that into, or you or the department would take that into some consideration as you looked at particular cases. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, and I think the listeners should take a look more closely if they want to know more about that at our compliance guidance. But what I can say there is that we've got in our leniency program, which probably was covered in the episode on collusion and cartel behavior.
Yeah.
There is a system in there where when we're looking at our recommendation to Canada's public prosecutors about what sentence or penalties or fines to seek from that company, we can look at compliance programs and determine whether or not they were credible and effective. And if we find that a program is credible and effective, we might use that as what we call a mitigating factor in our recommendation to the prosecutors. In other words, we would say, look, there's a credible and effective compliance program in place. We think that maybe you should reduce the amount of the fine that you would seek if you take this case forward. So that's I think what you're referring to is sort of a credit or an incentive system.
Yeah, you said the word I was going to ask you. Would you call that a mitigation? Basically, that somebody can work pretty hard to break the rules. Now let's narrow the lens here, because you've said a couple of really super interesting things around process. And what's super interesting is, as you would appreciate, listeners who work for a very large company would have resources at their location. They might even have their own in-house counsel that would be experts at this, but many retailers do not. Help me and help the listeners understand what a basic principles and a process kind of looks like. So, you set the culture and you said, listen, this is the culture organizationally, but of course, then there's process. And what can you chalk the field a little bit on what that kind of process looks like, and some tips for the listeners? Sure.
So I'll refer again to our guidance. A lot of what I'm about to say is detailed in the guidance that's on our website. At a high level, we've got 7 basic elements or principles that we would look at, and we expect to see in a credible and effective compliance program. And I'll run through them quickly, and I'm happy to sort of dive into anything you think is particularly useful. But, building off of culture, I talked about tone from the top. So we look for management commitment and support for the compliance program, and also for the compliance function. So whether that's a standalone compliance officer who is nominated by the board of directors and has a team, that might be the case for a large business,
sure,
all the way down to someone else at a high enough level of seniority who's given the task, on top of his regular work to handle compliance for the business. And in all of those situations, we look for clear management commitment and support. And then we sort of get into the nitty-gritty a bit. So, looking at your risks, assessing your risks and doing it regularly. And that, could mean a number of different things. It could mean looking at and understanding the laws that apply to your business. It could mean looking internally at, which folks who work for you or in the organization are exposed to risk, and then, building out your procedures around that. So risk assessment has a number of different components to it. Again, small business can do that, just as simply as talking to staff and understanding what they're doing, and then reading up using public resources on materials, for example, that are on our website about things like marketing practices or collusion or other areas of the law, and doing it in a very cost-effective way.
We've talked about over the series, there's multiple examples that I can think both over the series and in my own experience where you would have things like a second sign off on a price before it goes into market, or a marketing statement before it happens, or pricing. Is that an example of best practices? Do you see that? Would you recommend that? Like someone who is signing off, who has some greater knowledge of the Competition Act and its ins and outs, or even two people who did, but two people kind of sign, kind of a two people on the key kind of thing in the silo to help you stay out of trouble.
Yeah, so that actually takes me to another element that's important in any compliance program. That's policies, procedures, protocols, controls, whatever you want to call it. But those are all great examples of those types of things. So what do you actually put in place? What are the concrete measures that you and your business have put in place to mitigate your risks, to mitigate the risks that you identify when you assess what your business does and what you might be exposed to. And that takes me, I think, to the next point, which is, you get through all those things. You've thought about the risks, and then you've designed or figured out what you should do that's suited to your business to mitigate them. Then you got to tell your employees. You got to tell the staff who are involved, and frankly, ideally, all staff about what they should be on the lookout for. They should be trained up on the program itself and on the substance of the law. So talking to your staff, training them, and doing it in a way, again, that's tailored to your business, that's really important.
So we've talked about lots of good examples. Now let's get into resources. You've mentioned a few during the course of our conversation, as well as your colleagues have mentioned it over the series. So let's really dive in for a few minutes and talk about it. I think you have compliance boot camps and things like that. So really share what kind of resources are freely available for the folks listening.
Sure. So maybe I'll start with our foundational guidance. And so we call this an information bulletin on corporate compliance programs. That's a fancy way of saying we have a lot of information out there that adds meat on the bones to what I just talked about in terms of basic elements of a credible and effective compliance program. There are a few others in there that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but a lot of detail is in our information bulletin. And we use examples to bring that information to life. We've got suggestions for how to put these principles and elements into practice. And they're all tailored, or we talk about them in a way that you can tailor to the size of your business. We, like I said, don't think of this as a one-size-fits-all approach. We take a broad approach, and we look at the size of the business. We look at the industry that you operate in, and that informs the way that we might analyze and make a recommendation about whether a program is credible and effective. So our foundational guidance is out there. It's on the Bureau's website. It's free for all to review and look at. And I should mention one last thing about that piece. We're in the process now of reviewing and revising that guidance. And so we want to modernize it and make sure that it's fit for purpose. And we plan to go out and consult on our revised documents. So we would really love feedback from the RCC and your members about that new material, whether you find it useful, if there are ways for us to improve things like even the language that we use. What speaks to you, and how can it be best tailored for a small and medium-sized business especially? So that's kind of the first thing.
Yep.
The second part, as you mentioned, are the compliance boot camps that we've been rolling out. These are meant to be much smaller, bite-sized, plain language modules that help business people to understand the law. People who are not competition lawyers and experts by trade, and then gives them the tools to decide, where do I see risks in my business? Where do I want to dive in a more kind of detailed way to understand, different aspects of the law. So we've got these boot camps that are, again, free for everyone. They're on the Bureau's website, and they cover off a lot of the things that you will have heard of in the other episodes in this podcast series. And then the last thing that I'll mention is material that's specifically related to, trade association activities. So activities, for example, of the RCC or any other industry association or trade council that your members might be a part of. Because those types of fora, bring with them their own types of risks. So we've got some free resources on our website that are specific to participating in those.
So unpack that last one a little bit for me. Is that oriented towards people who are in the same industry but are competitors getting together under the umbrella of association? Is that just give me a high note about what you mean by that last one, just so we can kind of make sure everybody knows it's so great to belong to Retail Council. Okay.
So I think that's a big part of it. Companies that are competitors that have a forum to get together, that generally presents a higher level of risk than some day-to-day activities. Generally speaking, if you've got competitors in a room together, they should really know about competition laws. They should be aware of the types of things that they should and shouldn't say. They should be aware of things that they should and should not share in those fora, because broadly speaking, competitor collaborations under the Competition Act are a pretty significant area of risk. A trade association can present risks, but being aware of the law, understanding the way the law applies is really important for anyone within a business that's involved in trade association activities. And these activities can go from regular meetings or annual conferences or informal discussions. Anything like that can sort of fall into an area of risk where people should be well informed about the law.
Well, and if there's any members listening to this, members of the Retail Council of Canada, and you've been to any committee meetings or sat in any conference call, you'll know RCC takes extra care in just kind of making statements around informing that to begin with as well. So it's kind of I call that the belt and suspenders approach. Both be informed yourself, but also the folks at Retail Council of Canada, the advocacy folks themselves, some of whom are lawyers, really get this really well. So it's great you brought it up, but I wanted to make sure and dive into that one a little bit as well. Well, listen, this has been a great episode and a great capstone to our series of 4, which is really, every time I have these conversations, I realize we're just scratching the surface. But it sounds like there's lots of material. We'll put lots of links in the show notes to make sure people can actually find these things. They can, I'm sure they're well-designed websites, but sometimes just finding the stuff you're talking about. Any, what's next? What's next for the Competition Bureau? I mean, you're always an organic entity. You're always flexing to new things and new trends. What are you looking forward next to? I mean, this is part of what's next, right? Getting out and communicating. But is there anything that's top of mind for you for 2022, the rest of 2022 and 2023 and beyond?
There's a few things that we're going to continue to focus on. Law enforcement is our bread and butter work, and that's certainly going to be an ongoing priority area. There's a lot of priorities within that, and I would encourage anyone listening who wants to know where we're going on that front to take a look at the material on our website that covers our strategic vision, our priorities for each year. It's all very clearly stated on our website, and there's a ton of material out there to help people understand, who we are as an organization and the key things that we do. The other thing that I'll mention is also the fact that recently there were amendments to Canada's competition laws, pretty significant amendments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so
we've talked about a couple of those. Yeah. We've talked about
those. And I think that's an area where if folks want to learn more, broadly speaking, about what was changed in the law, we have a guide that we published and that we did some information sessions on. Again, all of that material is on the Bureau's website, and I would really encourage the listeners to take a look. I'm going to link it back to compliance. Those changes in the law are things that a good risk assessment should capture. And from there, you can then figure out, what do I need to do within my business to stay compliant? So that's just an example of where a risk assessment can really help your business ensure it doesn't get into hot water, even inadvertently.
And a good example of just because you don't know the law change doesn't mean you get off from it, right? I mean, it's not it's probably not a mitigating factor in your language. I didn't know that law had changed, so being informed is pretty important, right?
That's exactly right.
Well, listen, Majid, this has been fantastic discussion. Like I said, a great capstone to the series of 4 episodes, and thank you so much for your time and bringing it home for us, and for joining me on the Voice of Retail. And as I said, I'll put lots of the links in the show notes, and people can go learn more. And thank you again for helping us figure out and navigate these important issues.
I'm very happy to be here, and I'm glad to participate and contribute where I can. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next Podcast, and the Food Professor Podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of M.E. LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.